So, hello, everybody, and welcome to our first edition of Meet the Authors with Christina Shewell and Rocky Sansom. I'm just going to admit another person as they come in there. So, it's a real honour to be able to host today, and I'm very excited to get stuck in to our new Bible. So just to give some context today, we're actually going to get to know a little bit about the story behind the book. I'm going to ask some questions and you're going to be able to ask some questions too. So I'm going to make a start. So Christina, I'd like to start by asking you and giving some context really to the journey that's led to this book, because obviously I'm sure most of you know there was a first edition, and the first edition was the first Bible of mine, really, actually, that I loved dipping into and still do, actually. So when this one came to me, it was like gold, struck gold. What I'd really like to ask you, Christina, is to learn a bit more about the rationale for that book and how we
Do you
got
mean the first edition in the beginning?
first edition, yeah.
Well, I'd never intended to write a book because there are some very good books about singing and there are very good books about spoken voice and about voice disorders. And I'd done an awful lot of teaching, and various people said to me, your handouts are so full, why don't you write a book? And I still said, no, I couldn't face it. But it then began to appeal to me because I've never wanted to do a PhD because I've not wanted to narrow my focus. And it came because I suddenly realized there was no book about voice work, practical voice work, that was for all three of our voice practitioner professions. And so I thought, well, I'll have a go, because I was asked to do so by a small publisher, which then was bought out by Wiley Blackwell, which was really lucky, actually, because, as you know, they're very big, very successful. And so it developed over a course of 10 years. I wanted it to be, and this is really important and something Rocky and I honored in the second edition, I wanted it to be scholarly but accessible, and I wanted it to have extracts from literature that illustrate aspects of voice, and to have personal stories, i.e., Rocky or I saying, I do this. Well, at that point, it was me. And I wanted lots of case stories. And it just sort of came together, and I had no idea really how it would go down. I do look at it now, and Rocky knows this, and think, who is the woman who wrote this? I have no idea how I did that book. I was very busy. I had child at home, lodgers, a dog, work, but it's really because voice is so interesting, and I just became more and more interested and set aside blocks of time to write. So that's what happened.
And it obviously must have taken on its own life force. Did you feel like it was going to overwhelm you at any point?
Oh, absolutely, often. And I think it's true, and Rocky would probably agree, at times with the second edition. It is a huge job writing a book. And I remember my partner Mark saying, "Are you halfway through?" And I said, "Yes, I think I am." And this is a message for all of you, really, both live and on the playback. And he said, "In that case, you're on the kind of downward slope now." And I like that image.
You get so far and you can't turn back.
Yeah. Yes.
So that brings to, I'm really interested in the synergistic relationship between you and Rocky, and how did you meet and how did book two emerge from that story?
Why don't we both tell our stories? Rocky, you go first.
Oh, sure. I knew Christina Shewell's name, so I worked very, very closely in New York with a gentleman named Tom Burke, and he encouraged me to go to Christina's workshop that she was holding in New York City, where I was living at the time. And so I first met her just as an attendee of one of her workshops, and found her book there. And we then met again at the Vasta conference in London in 14, yes. And I had used her book just as a one of my absolute go-to resources for years at that point. And I believe at that time we just connected, and I said hi, and we chatted for a long time at the conference. But then we really started to connect. I was the editor of the Voice and Speech Review for many years, and I asked Christina to join the editorial board because of her renown. And she actually wrote an article, one of my favorites that's ever been published, actually. I'm probably not supposed to say that, but it's one of my favorites. And we really connected through that, and our relationship evolved through the connection with the Voice and Speech Review. And she reached out to me. We remember it differently, but we had a Zoom circa 2017, 18, and she was chatting about her book and whether or not she wanted to do a second edition. And I very casually mentioned, well, I could help you with the references and the to sort of like update the references, and it sort of grew from there. And then she reached back a couple years later, and we kind of formalized what that would mean and look like, and the rest is history.
So you decided to take it a step forward and actually formalize it. Um, and did that feel, because obviously the book, were you working to a structure that existed before? How did that synergistically work? Was there a lot of brainstorming and a lot of creative work about how it would? Tell us a bit about that.
So, I mean, yes, just very briefly, I had been asked to do a second edition twice by the publishers and said no. And the publisher said, may we ask why? And I said, I'd really rather be in the garden. You know, I cannot face updating all the references. And then this man said, oh, would you allow me to help with the references? And I thought, okay, then it becomes possible. So I mean, right from the beginning, Rocky's been really respectful that it was my book and there was a structure and the chapters would stay, although we all reorganized the order to, I think, a much improved. And he took on updating the references. But of course, what that meant is much more than just updating the references, because he would, you know, I would say we need a reference, and we were back and forth all the time with emails. And he would then write a little, very short summary of what he found. So he was writing little bits of new material. And I asked him if he would write, you know, some original material. So 3 of the chapters are entirely Rocky, apart from the public speaking one, which has got some bits of mine. And he very humbly said, if I do this, would you acknowledge me? I remember this conversation. And I said, look, if you do this, I will make you co-author. Because, you know, there's been a really, it would not have happened without Rocky. But all the time we were back and forth. We met to begin with, I think, once a month and then every fortnight.
Yeah.
And it was really, you know, every single thing was read by both of us. And I would say something and we felt free to kind of say, no, that doesn't work. And so we moved on step by step, like any great endeavor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm quite interested to know that as a single, having done it as a single author, was it more rewarding as a dual process?
It was just different. I mean, I'm ready. I could not have done this on my own at this point. I'm older. My brain doesn't work well. I'm very glad it's done. I won't ever write another book. And it was lovely having Rocky coming in with a different angle. And also, and this is absolutely true, I'd not thought that it would have a bigger market with the States. I mean, it sounds naive, but I hadn't. But Rocky has brought that and also the American views. So it's very transatlantic, isn't it, the book? Whenever possible, we tried to put, well, as you know, we've put speech therapists, pathologists throughout, but lots more examples. So no,
Yeah.
it was just different.
Yeah, I would say that was another sort of kind of angle is we really tried to, we had a lot of fun conversations about specific words where I go, Christina, I looked up this word in Google and I'm not sure what that means in the UK. Can you? And so we would kind of play around with a lot of things like that, but also just to try to make the book to the best of our ability incorporate what's happened in the past 15 years in terms of
Yeah.
just research, the way people view things and what they prioritize in the field. And so it was a lot of back and forth. I do think it's important to honor, as Christina said, while there's been significant changes, it's of course her book, but it was nice to have some fun, respectful back and forth about, no, this is prioritized. No, I respectfully disagree. This is prioritized. So it kind of made me think about, what I thought was important in the field.
And
Yes.
we were, I just say, we were absolutely on the same page. I mean, I don't know who all of your faces, and obviously we don't know the people who watch this later, but we know you're from different professions. And right the way through, we wanted to honor those three professions, and also anybody else, like maybe a speech scientist who read it, So we never lost sight of that.
Yeah. I would quite like to focus on the fusion between the art and the science, because as you alluded to earlier, it's led you to combine really quite conventional academia with personal stories, with case notes. And I think that's the wonder of its magic, isn't it? There is something for everybody in here and something to keep you going back to. I'm quite interested to know about that journey and how that actually changed you. So obviously this has been a lengthy process. How has that process changed you? Has it changed you?
Rocky, do you want to go first?
Oh, sure. Well, I heard there's a famous saying, and one of my teachers in grad school would say, you never truly know how you feel until you write it down. Which is I think an over exaggeration, but I also think there's truth in it. And so this particular book was sort of so expensive, and I had to look at different things Christina had said and things that I said, and it really helped me solidify kind of the nut of what I teach. Like, this is what I think is important, and I will say I identify that before I wrote the book, but this just made it so much clearer in terms of, like, not only here's the nut of what I teach, and here's all this beautiful expansiveness. So to be able to kind of go back and forth between, okay, here's what I find important and here's all these other wonderful things to play with, I think that's kind of what the book helped crystallize for me, if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And when you were doing the research and finding out new things, did that change any of it? Did you have a point where you're thinking, oh my goodness, there's so much more to this than I originally thought, as you disappeared down the rabbit hole, or not?
Do you want to answer that, Christina?
Yes. Yes. And just about the science and art, I mean, we live in such a divided world, and the only way we're all going to survive is to work together. And I've always been interested in the joining of polar opposites. And there's a lovely quote which I put in the book and know by heart, by Mario Petrucci, who's a poet and a physicist. And he wrote, "Science and art are kissing cousins. They each, in their own way, pay the world full attention." And I think I love that, and part of meditation is being present, pay the world full attention. And I think that's what we tried to do. And at the same time, you never know everything. I mean, the more I learn about voice, and in that book, I kept panicking and thinking, but there's so much more. And, do we put this in? Do we put that in? And that's why we like working in voice, I think, isn't it? Well, one of the aspects.
Absolutely. And if I can just offer a thought, if you want a really tangible example about how did the research affect my practice, I would say that particularly one of the chapters I wrote was about teaching online, kind of taking all this and putting it in the online space. And I signed up for that because it's something that I do. I do quite a lot of that, particularly in the business world and coaching. I would say I do several sessions a week on average. But I actually, through the research of having to kind of formalize, okay, these are like practices and research about teaching online, I actually did adjust a lot of what I do in terms of how I structure a session and how I create more of a fun space in the online world. Like, so that particular chapter had a direct kind of immediate application to how I do my thing.
Mm. I really recommend that chapter. I learned a lot reading that.
And are there any standout moments for you where you maybe shifted direction or maybe added to what you did that you hadn't anticipated before you engaged in that research?
Who are you asking?
Sorry,
Who?
Christina.
Me. Well, mainly, I think hugely with the chapter on voice and emotions, because there's so much work now. I mean, I've been interested in neuroscience for years, and there's so much material now and research and thinking about the link between mind and body, to put it very simply. And there's a lot out there, and I'm always fascinated by it. The talk I'm going to do for Vasta will be on the power of words to affect the body. And so that was the area that, yes, that's where I learned a great deal.
That chapter is essentially new, and it's one of my favorites in the entire book. I really like that chapter.
Yes. And I think as we were expanding, I think the interesting thing with pedagogy is because voice intersects so many, well, it's life, isn't it, really? So pedagogy and voice, and it's exponentially growing, isn't it? And new areas are coming on board. I'm always very fascinated by people's processes, because I think one of the challenges as we try to make sense of something that is so vast is to break things down into a series of building blocks that enable us to have some semblance of understanding. And I think you have a real unique way, Christina, in your first book, which you've carried over into this one, of building those building blocks and creating a scaffold, really. And I'm really intrigued to know how you ended up with your first sort of scaffolding.
Yeah, you're the only person who's ever used that word to me, and I love it, Debbie, actually. I wish I'd used it in the book, scaffold, because I call it a framework. Well, how, as briefly as possible, my first job was working I retrained as a voice teacher, having been a speech and language therapist for 12 years. And my first job, I was very lucky. I worked with Patsy Rodenberg, who's, as many of you will know, is one of our foremost voice coaches at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. And I was asked by the then head of singing, Noelle Barker, a wonderful woman who sadly now died, to also work with the singers on their spoken voice. And I had to start thinking about what it was in common that we were working for. Because although you singers, singing teachers, will talk about a beautiful voice, we don't often do that in the spoken voice world. You know, there's a whole spectrum of voices. And in fact, the VASTA conference in New Orleans, the theme is, what is a good voice? So I started thinking about this, and a term that's used a lot in spoken voice, or was at the Guildhall anyway, freeing the voice. And I said to Patsy, so what is a free voice? And she said, oh, well, you know, it's a bit of, a bit of this, bit of that. And I kind of have a logical mind as well as hopefully an imaginative mind. And so I started to think about what it is we hear in a voice, and how when we are listening to a voice, how we can perhaps use headings. And I wanted it to be accessible, as I say, for singing teachers, spoken voice teachers, and therapists. And I wanted the terms to be really familiar, but I also wanted them to have a scientific and physical reality. So then I came up with those 8 categories. And, you know, I say when I'm teaching, it's a way of thinking about it. You know, it's not the be all and end all. It certainly isn't a method, but it allows us to kind of go, what have we here? The first thing we do when we're working is we should go, who have we here? And then we can say, what have we here? And this is the analysis of what am I hearing in this voice to know what I then do.
Mm. And when you came on board, Rocky, were there any shifts in that? Or did you decide that the framework was a really good one and that you'd remain within it? I mean, obviously, you added your own chapters, but
Sure, we did it. So Christina and I had some really lengthy conversations before we ever wrote a word, in terms of, what would the second edition look like. And we knew, of course, we wanted to update the research, and we knew we wanted to add some more chapters, and there are particular chapters we wanted to really retool. But we also just thought, all right, what is beautiful, to use your word, Christina, and like what should remain. And I think like the voice framework, like that wasn't touched much. Now the chapters were updated, but in terms of like the central idea of that and how that's sort of structured, that has carried through. I think some of the languaging, particularly around the word free, I think we were really really specific and clear, and kind of redefining that specific word. Is that a fair statement, Christina?
Yeah.
No, because that is such a within the spoken voice world, the quote unquote free voice is a loaded term for many people, and both in a good way and in a challenging way. And so we tried to be really clear about that.
And we had to update, since the first edition, and it's amazing, there's been as you know, so much more focus on equality, diversity, inclusion, and generally, acceptance and belonging. And we had to be very careful about some of the things we said. So particularly around the field of gender, of course. And within the voice skills framework, we had to reframe some of the specifics, about what is a good pitch, an appropriate pitch. Well, it's an appropriate pitch is what that speaker actually wants. If it doesn't damage that speaker, obviously. So,
which brings us nicely to the voice skills framework and the voice skills perceptual framework, because I think, well, there's so much that the book contributes, but that's probably quite a major contribution to the field. And I'd love to explore around those, how it evolved and the impact on you and anything around that.
Well, so in the speech language therapy, speech pathology world, the way that voices are described by a lot of people is grubbus, and many of you will know grubbus. That you grade a voice, you listen to roughness, breathiness, asthenic, it's a term that Hirano introduced, and strain. And I was on a committee to look at the perceptual analysis of voice, and we all agreed that is very limited. Voice is so much more than what goes on here. There's breath and the whole body is involved and all sorts of things. And so I don't know how, I decided I would have a go at developing, from thinking about the free voice or what we were working for, a way which I call a framework of kind of, first of all, listening to this, then that. And I talk about turning a beam of light from your ear, which is a mixed metaphor. But it is, you can listen to one bit of a voice and then another and another. And then in research, you need numbers. And so I then thought, okay, and this was in collaboration with colleagues, who were saying, could you do a numerical scheme? So I developed the VSPP, the Voice Skills Perceptual Profile. Now, I have never had time to validate that or to standardize it. Never. I've always gone on to new things. So it exists, and it's been used quite a bit in single case studies. But it's quite a complex scheme. In terms of numerical, getting interjudge and intra-judge reliability. So it exists, but it's there really if you want a numerical scheme, if you're doing research. The framework is the thing I now teach much, much more, because it really is a way of this mysterious thing called voice, of finding a way into it. Is that clear?
It is, yeah. Rocky, you're about to...
Yeah, can I just offer one sort of what I think is a complementary thought? So to be clear, that framework is entirely Christina's idea, just to be clear, okay? And so but as someone who's used it, even before I knew Christina, in the collegial way and friendship way that I know her now, I'll speak from just personal experience as someone who was in an acting school and in a singing school, and then someone who was an early teacher. This flirts with controversy, I'm about to say, but there's a couple of words that are just thrown around to fix everything, and breath and resonance are two of them. And so, well, let's just say, well, we'll fix it with breath. We'll fix it with resonance, and both of those things are true and beautiful and good. But there's more, and so there's terms and different ideas that we can break things apart. So it's certainly other people have broken things apart and look at things in different ways. But what I love is the research behind what Christina does to try to break up those ideas.
Yes, and how do you use it within your practice? At what point do you have a particular stage when you're working with somebody that you use it, and some insights into that.
Do you want to go that first, Christina?
Well, I don't use it at all. I mean, what I mean by that is I don't need to have a piece of paper, but I do, if I'm asked to, let's say I'm doing some coaching with a business client, I will sit there and think, okay, what's going on with the body? What's going on with the breath? What's going on with the channel? You know, I'll use the framework without writing a form. And I don't use the VSPP at all because I don't need to. It's not something I need.
Yeah, I would say when I'm working one-on-one with a coach and as a coach in 1 or 2, 3 sessions, it's not something I necessarily systematically discuss with a client, but it's in my head. And in terms of way to give feedback, when I teach a voice and speech class, I would say at the undergraduate level, I offer it in a really broad way. It's like, okay, here's how to get into certain exercises, and here's sort of a way to think about how we're playing. At the graduate level, we go into quite some detail.
And two things. So one
How
is
do you train your graduates to use it?
As a way to, so like the undergraduates, as a way to explore and play as actors and singers. And then for those who are interested in teachers, it's a way to sort of like, well, when you have someone in front of you, what do you do in your head? So someone's just performed, what do you say? And so it's a way to, it's not a technique because that word is very complicated, but it's a tool that allows you to be able to, okay, I know how to start. I know, okay, I can start to go through these things. And if I get stuck, I'm not sure what to say. Let me just go through these list of things. Channel. Excellent. Let's play with that.
Kind of like a walking scaffold. It's a imprinted scaffold in your head that you work with. You were going to say something, Christina, and I
Yes,
can't.
sorry, I interrupted. So two things. One is that there is no such thing as a totally comprehensive scheme. I mean, there are things that are not in that perhaps could be, should be, and also that we don't think about it when we're doing it. I mean, one of the participants I can see is Frith, who is a terrific singing teacher. Now, I had a singing lesson last year with Frith because I've taken up singing again. Now, what Frith was doing with me, I wasn't thinking, oh, that belongs to this section, this section. You know, you're in the moment, you're exploring. So it's, and Frith knows things that I don't know. All of you will know things that I don't know. So for instance, I've done the Estill course. In fact, I did the first ever when Joe Estill came over, but it's not what I use all the time. But the lovely thing about voice is that we can, we can choose from such a wide range. And that framework is not meant to be doctrinaire. It's meant to be something that doesn't matter where you come from, it still works. And the other thing I just want to say quickly is, and I think you know this from the book, that it's also, I mean, I wrote it to help me know what to do with people, because that is our job. You know, we have a person and there's something going on. And there's a danger if we don't have a system that we focus on the most obvious thing. And sometimes it's something very subtle they're doing that's actually affecting everything. And I think a systematic framework like this one and others enables people to not make the mistake of focusing on the obvious while they decide what to do.
And if I could jump into that, like one thing and that we both Christina and I talked about very early in the process is, in no way do we think techniques or methods are bad in any way whatsoever. In fact, we talk about them and champion, so many and talk about their research and impact. But in terms of what the book is, that was something that is, if I don't want to speak for you, but that's something that you communicated was important to me, and something I communicated was important to you, that we're not creating a method, and that this is supposed to be, this is supposed to be a grouping of tools and ideas that have really wide impact and are porous, that can like work with other people's ideas and techniques. And that's what I think is so beautiful about it, is that it invites all that other kind of discussion.
Yeah. And if you have created a method, it's accessible method. I mean, you're too busy in your garden, as you said earlier, to come out and sometimes we package up these methods, don't we? And they become more of a commercial, and then there's a barrier to entry. Whereas yours is wonderfully open, isn't it? For all to read and all to participate in, which I think gives it a different flavour altogether in terms of its openness.
We hope so. And of course, in the prologue, I mean, a little introduction to those chapters of massive exercises, it's ludicrous, really, grouping those exercises under those headings on one level, because so many of them, they work on different aspects of the framework, but it's just a way in. And always it's been like, I've seen it like a recipe book, I've got a hard-boiled egg, a bunch of sweet corn, and something else, and this enables me to make something, and that's what the idea of all those exercises are. Or I will make something from these exercises.
Yeah. And can we maybe focus now, Rocky, on some of the chapters? You obviously have brought a different whole set of new skills into the book. How did you translate those into the book, or how did you settle on the chapters that you've settled, and just talk us around those chapters?
Sure. Yeah, we had a long conversation about what those would be. That was very kind of Christina to offer me the opportunity to write a couple of chapters. And so I thought
Three.
about three, yeah, three. And so what was we focused on kind of what my interests were, frankly. And I knew I wanted to talk about some sort of history chapter because that's been such an important part of my research journey and focus. And so what I love about this particular chapter is it's everything I've done in like 10 pages. And so it's great. And so it's just a really crystallized, okay, like here is the scope of the field from all these different perspectives. And then, so with the business chapter, that's a big part of my professional practice. Now, certainly in the first book, as Christina mentioned, Christina has a wide breadth and knowledge and experience working in the business and political world as well. But we took some of those ideas and just really expanded them and tried to look at my experience and kind of the things that I prioritize and how that connects with what Christina does. And so that was the business chapter. And then with the online world, that's something I had already been engaged with quite heavily even before the pandemic. But as we all know, with the pandemic, it's sort of supercharged that in terms of how we communicate and the scope that we communicate. So if to be candid, had a lot of really practical experience just getting on Zoom and Teams with people, but hadn't done sort of the deep research dive. And so it was, as I said, that was kind of a beautiful thing to have research really inform my practice was to, all right, I have to write a chapter on how to do this. So I can do it, but let me think about how to systematically support other people in doing it well. And it's something that I think is important to our field as is exhibited by this very moment.
And in terms of those three chapters, perhaps we could focus on one. Uh, could we maybe focus on the public? I know this was a dual chapter, actually, wasn't it? But could we focus on the public speaking chapter? Because that's a new one, isn't it?
Sure. So in terms of just what's in it,
Yeah, give us some goodies.
sure. So the I think the first thing I talk about is that there is a very large tonal shift in how we think about working with artists and working with people in the more public space. So dare I say, artists are far more open to just exploring, hey, try this thing. And a lot of them will do it. I always joke, seniors on a drama course, if you go quack like a duck and fly out the window, I'll go, okay. And that's just because they're so used to playing and exploring and being free, right? And singers, here's this music, let's just try it out and sing it. Within the business world, that's less the idea. And so it's about, okay, here is this challenge. The person has come to you with this particular need. How do we address this particular need? And if you want them to do an exercise, a lot of times you have to start with like the reason for the exercise is blank. So within the more performing arts world, a lot of times you can layer that in later, or you have help the students sort of self-discover it, but within the business world, it's very pointed often. And so I talk about that dynamic. We also talk about it in that particular chapter, how we can take the framework that Christina has and really synthesize it in terms of problem solving, in terms of, okay, people come in with these particular business needs, here's some immediate go-tos. And then I also look at what I consider to be sort of secondary ideas that so often come up within the voice world. So they've hired you as a voice coach, but maybe you didn't realize they also wanted you to help put the speech together, and they didn't tell you that, but they're sitting in front of you, and they go, so yeah, so how should I structure this? And so I go through some basic ideas that pop up a lot as a voice coach that aren't necessarily like quote unquote voice related, such as storytelling, such as structuring, such as how to putting together PowerPoint decks, and in the book offers some resources and some key, some central ideas, but particularly resources to go that if you see that as a big part of your business, in my professional opinion, here's the things that you need to have like in your toolkit.
Yeah, excellent. Christina, what was your contribution to that chapter? Well, you've gone on mute. She's on mute. Got on mute.
Partly because my chair is creaking and I didn't want to distract Rocky while he was talking. Well, the thing that that Rocky definitely used, one of the things was I'm fascinated by the whole notion that, we go and hear a speaker and we say, oh, wasn't that wonderful? Wasn't she, he, they wonderful? And so I developed this kind of analysis because I thought, oh, so interesting. So what's happening here with speaking wonderfully? What does that mean? And then, so that's different to the framework. And while Rocky was talking, I remembered actually, because I know so many of you are singers, I did also have a go really based on Dinah Harris's categories of a perceptual scheme for listening to the singing voice. But in the business voice, I did some business coaching very recently, and I will go on doing that. Our job is to go, okay, yeah, tell me what you want from this. Let's have a look at a video of you. Let's ask you to do something. And then what is it that's going on that could be changed? And it's much more than the perceptual framework. So, but it still is a helpful thing to work out what does it mean to speak wonderfully if we actually analyze that in terms of vocal and body behavior. But otherwise, the chapter, it's mainly Rocky. I've got, I think, two scales from my first thing and bits and pieces of mine, but Rocky wrote it.
I think it's really interesting, Rocky, when you talked about working with business people and it being really different. And I think most of us on here it will be resonating with us because it is very different in terms of having that willingness for creative play. And I'd love to hear how you have experienced some of those barriers when working in business, particularly in a group, and how you overcome them.
Sure. So particularly in a group setting, if you're doing kind of a seminar and you have a group exercise with a bunch of people, say in insurance, for example, you have to start small with the playfulness. And so you can't just ask for these. So let's all explore the space, exploring different kinds of vowel, like they'll shut down very often, right? And so often you have to kind of build to these sort of larger, more explorative things, and along the way, directly relate it to what it is they do and what they're trying to gain. So in a singing lesson, you don't really have to do that work. Like where you know that you're trying to become a better singer to sing this song. It's just inherently built in to everything that's happening in the lesson. That's not the case in the business world. And so you have to draw those parallels and connections. So when you're in a meeting and you're having a really hard time finding your ideas, this is how you can use this. When you're trying as a leader, when you're trying to, connect with people in a more approachable and less intimidating way, you see CEO person, this is a way that you can connect with them in a more approachable kind of way. So you have to draw those connections. Whereas in singing, acting, a lot of that's really kind of inherent.
Yes. So do you feel like you're almost having to get them to buy into it first?
Absolutely. There's a huge buy-in. And it's not just sort of setting it up. You have to kind of do the buy-in continually. And once they do that, then you can start to be more playful. And then there's like a group dynamic that happens where, okay, well, they were playful, they were playful. And if there's any, and as like a pro tip, if there's anyone with power in the room, if anyone's a supervisor or a director, if you can get that person playful, that's the keystone. And then they all go, oh, okay. We can like have a great time because our boss, like Susan, is having a great time, right? So that's some kind of some added dynamics to that.
And have you ever managed to get the lid to blow completely off where they're kind of like liberated to the point that it goes crazy?
Uh, that's when it's really fun. I have. If you it's helpful if you have a multi-day event because that oftentimes happens on the second day.
Yeah, very interesting. Um, so we've got few minutes left before I open it up to other people to ask you questions. Between chapter 23 and chapter 31, to be precise, it is like a treasure trove of goodies. I call it the goodie bag section because you kind of bring everything. You just throw hundreds of exercises at us. So can we maybe explore some takeaways from the goodie bag? I'll let you drive where you want to go, your faves.
Do you mean like core exercises for all voice work with all voice practitioners?
Yes.
Oh,
Oh,
well, shall I go first? And then,
please, yeah, of course.
so I mean, the Jerzy Grotowski, the great theatre director who wrote a fascinating book on theatre practice, he has this quote again that I quote, imprint upon your memory, first comes the body, then the voice. And, I think that informs everything, that, there's so much stress in this world and people are holding so much. So I would always say, yeah, attend to the body. And, voice work can be in stillness or it can be in movement. And then I guess the second thing, there's so many exercises that are fun and, good to do. I think the jaw is really interesting. And, that as soon as I tighten my jaw, all sorts of things happen to my voice, my resonance, my pitch, the way I come across, the impression I give, and that actually the jaw is so important. And when I was a student at Central very early on doing the MAVS course, the MA in Voice Studies, which some of you may have done, my voice teacher said to me, your jaw is very tight. And there were lots of exercises, which we all know, like this and so on. But I was doing Alexander teaching at the time. And I thought, you know what, if I regularly change my temporomandibular jaw setting by just releasing, it's going to change my whole habit. And that's what I did driving up. I was commuting a lot between Cambridge and London. And it's one of my core exercises, and it makes a big difference. And there's a story in the book about a woman who didn't have to have a tooth removed because she stopped grinding her teeth because she was doing that. So, I mean, those are just two. I think body is cool, and I think the jaw is really interesting, and it's important in all our work, whatever voice practitioner we are. So,
Talk us through
Robbie,
the jaw one. Give us a quick run through the jaw release exercise.
me.
Yeah.
Okay, well, very quickly. So this is for those of you who are, no, I suppose you can do it on playback. So what I say to people is I say, okay, sometimes when you're on a train, you see someone has gone to sleep and it's not very pretty because they go like this. And we're taught all our childhood, close your mouth, don't eat with your mouth full, open. And I'm going to say to you, all of you, you don't have to do this, by the way, those of you here, just let your jaw release. Imagine you're in a train. Do not worry about looking gorgeous. You all do look gorgeous. Let your jaw go. And then what I do is I say, in your imagination, and don't do it, how many fingers could you get between your teeth in the vertical dimension? So 1, 2, 3. And I demonstrate that. I take much longer than I'm doing with you. And I say, hold up beside your head, how many you think fit. And nearly always people overestimate. So I first did this in the City of London, working with a group of businessmen, bankers. And there was a chap who, honestly, I'm not joking, spoke like this. I mean, really, the clenched jaw. And he stood there like this, going like this. And I realized that he wasn't going to do any work with me on jaw release whilst he felt that his jaw was already released. So I do that with people, and then we talk about releasing the jaw. And then I say, this is going to be one of the most boring exercises you've ever done. Let's walk around the room with the jaw release. But I now, because of my training in mindfulness, I say, tune into the feeling of your jaw joint at the beginning. And then people do that. And I say, okay, close your eyes if you're comfortable, tune in at the end. And people will often feel that subtle difference. That is, as Kitty Verdellini says, it's so important that we use our own perceptions of what our bodies are doing.
Rocky.
Sure. So I had a good think about this. I was going to say ultimately the body work stuff is so paramount. If your body can be relaxed and engaged, then so much just naturally happens after that. But in terms of some other really useful section in the grab bag, so often in our field we have what I call the breath wars in terms of people fighting over like what's good breath and different breath technique. And what I love about the breath exercises in the book is I'd like to think that they're a little Switzerland. They're a little like they don't get into the breath wars, so they kind of cross bridges, as Christina loves to say. So I love that. I love that you can really go to the breath exercises, and it's very fundamental in a wonderful, helpful way. I also there's quite a few from like so since we're on the business note, there's also quite a few exercises on eye contact, which I can't find any other book that has exercises on how to help people with eye contact. That was something that was already there, and then Christina and I expanded those for the second edition. So acting, singing, particularly public speaking, I think that's a unique sort of like subcategory of exercises, if I do say so.
Is there any particular nugget of an exercise that you can give us brief?
Very quickly, sure. I call it the bumblebee. So whenever you're doing public speaking, you want to think about having eye contact as if you're a bumblebee. So you land on a flower, you pollinate the flower, and then you fly and go somewhere else, and you pollinate the flower. And so if you give people the idea of, okay, your eye contact has to be bumblebee-like, then you can connect it to breath. So, hello, my name is Rocky Sansom. I'm so very excited to be here with you today. As we think about how we can explore voice in the business setting and the political setting, so you can go to different places, and the exercise kind of walks you through how to support people in doing that.
Great. Wow. Thank you very much. I'm now going to let other people ask you some questions because I'm sure they've had enough of me driving the questions. So any wonderful questions, anything from the floor? Yes, Heidi. You can take your mic off and ask. You might be on mute. Are you on mute? You put your thumb up. Did I interpret that correctly?
Oh, yeah. No, I didn't. All I was doing was agreeing with what's gone. Thank you. That was my positive thumbs up. No, I'm not. I'm not planning to ask a question. I'm just thrilled to hear the development of what was such an important, as you say, Bible beforehand. And I agree with Christina, so many absolute core concrete foundations of our voice work exist anyway. And as she was talking about the jaw, it came to me that phrase slack jaw yokel, which is quoted, and I can't remember where, I'm afraid. But I'm sure she would remember that. And I do use either that and her exercises to encourage, as she says again, the mindfulness of what's going on in the jaw. That's not a question. I'm sorry, that was just me thumbing up to what's gone already.
Well, it's lovely to hear your contribution anyway. Does anybody else want to make a contribution or to ask a question? You're not going to happen to yourselves again.
Out of curiosity, have you thought, or maybe, I don't know the second book, the second edition yet, but about having some kind of audio or recordings from certain exercises where something is demonstrating? Have you thought about that, or is it already included, or was it not at all the aim of what you wanted with this second edition?
Paula, it's such a good question. And in the first edition, there were recordings. I did perceptual voice recordings, which were included, and different qualities. To be honest, this time round, there just hasn't been time to do that. I mean, we've certainly talked about it. And you can argue that a kind of print book or even a digital book is slightly old cat fashioned. There in a sense needs to be a website full of recordings. And we did talk about that, didn't we, Rocky, at one point? But we're just too busy. I mean, if somebody wants to come along and approach us and say, could they do an associated audio group, then we'll talk to them, won't we, Rocky?
Sure. Yeah. It's we just looked at the timeline from the publisher and our lives and tried we thought the best and highest use of our time was what we did with the book itself.
Excellent. Thank you.
Can
I would
just
be interested, by the way. Just a side note, but thank you.
Can I just pick up Frith put in the chat? Frith, I don't know whether you want to speak to this. Very different working with vocational and avocational singers. And does that mean professional and amateur? You're muted. You're still muted. I didn't know that term, avocational. I don't know if other people know it.
That was my assumption in that, yeah.
Yeah, professional and amateur. She may have disappeared and come back in a minute.
But I agree with them. Oftentimes it's in my experience working with the different kinds of focus within lessons, it just goes into what is ultimately valued. And that is our role as a coach, as a teacher, is to find what people value.
Somebody else got any questions? Oh, Rebecca.
Sorry, it's a bit of a boring question. I like the idea of a framework. I'm very logical and methodical myself. I'm just wondering, I don't quite know how to frame the question, but the framework's obviously made up of lots of different areas, so books, research that you've read. What's your process, I suppose, of organizing all that material on one subject, and then how does that process then form the framework?
Well, it's not a boring question at all. It's a really interesting one. Can you just say a little bit more about what you mean? That's all. I mean, what specifically you're interested in knowing?
So recently I was told I overthink in my teaching, and I'm very obsessed with keeping notes, which comes across a little bit prescriptive. And I was just wondering what other people's processes are to organize all the information from all the different sources, and then how does that inform the framework and things you use in practice? So
kind of not being organized but not obsessional. Yeah. Well, I think right from the beginning I wanted it to be free and flexible. I talk about it sometimes like tidying the desk of your perceptions. That and I singing teachers, theatre voice teachers, therapists use very different terminology, but I wanted the boxes to hold those different terms. Yeah. And when I'm working training in it, I'll say there's no wrong perception. You might say, gosh, that's a really irritating voice. Now that's a subjective impression, and your job is to go, okay, not right, irritating, but what is it that is irritating me? And is it that there's a rather monotonous pitch? Is there a phonation issue? Is the resonance very kind of cramped, limited? You see, I'm using all sorts of words. So that within those 8 categories, there's huge freedom as long as you know what it is you're listening to. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Thank
how do
you.
you take your knowledge, I suppose? Do you keep it in like note form?
Do you mean about a particular voice, or do you mean about the whole field of voice?
I suppose both.
Well, particular voice now, as I say, I don't need to do that. I just do it in my head, but I have to write reports if I'm seeing a therapy case. The whole field of voice, and this is true for any of you who write, I just gather things. I hear a funny joke and I write it down under a heading. So I'm going through this process in the keynote I'm going to do for the VASTA conference. I'm just gathering from all sorts of sources. I'll read a newspaper and I'll put it on in there. And then I'll weave it. It's a bit like sewing, you've got different colored thread, and then you decide, or patchwork actually, the better analogy, where those pieces go. So don't be afraid, just make notes. Don't worry about them not being organized. If it's something that interests you, make a note of it. The old-fashioned way used to be on index cards, which wasn't a bad idea because you could sit there and look through them. But gather and then find a thread.
That makes sense.
What's interesting,
Okay.
actually, picking up on what Rebecca's just asked, is the sheer intuitive way with which you work with voice and have been able to do so for many years. And I'm just wondering, you've obviously been through this incredibly rigorous process of getting to that point of deconstructing absolutely everything that you've done and doing copious amounts of research. How long was it till you got to that place where it was relaxed and intuitive and you could just...
Darling, it's still developing, I haven't got anywhere. I'm a work in progress, we all are. I mean, to take your question seriously though, I mean, what is intuition? It's an interesting word. I think, yeah, I am really old now. I do have 50 years experience, and I'm fascinated by voice, but there are many other things I'm interested in. But I know that I know about voice, and it is intuition, but I will often test out an intuition. But truly, not even humorously, the more you know, the more you know you don't know. So, and T.S. Eliot's line in East Coker, the only wisdom is the wisdom of humility. Humility is endless. And I think that's a really important line, I do know a lot. That's not, I'm not being falsely humble, but I also know that I don't know everything. Rocky does.
Oh, stop it. No friend. If anyone knows everything, it's you. Can I offer just one thought to your kind of line of question, Rebecca and Debbie? Would that be okay?
Absolutely.
One thing I chatted about in the business chapter, but I think it actually applies to sort of all voice teaching coaching, is the getting comfortable in only 1 to 3 notes. And so that's particularly true, I think, for people outside of the arts, but I think it's also sometimes extraordinarily helpful to people inside the arts. I know for me, I have this instinct sometime to go, oh, and we can work on this and this and this and this and this. But I've learned people just can't process it. And it's not me, it's my excitedness. It's not what I know, it's just how I'm excited to work with them. But in terms of just what people can process, I just sort of try to reverse. I go, oh, I only want 1 or 2 things from people, and just once I kind of got more comfortable with that in my teaching, I found that I had more fun, and B, I felt my intuition improved a bit because I didn't feel this pressure to sort of give so much.
Yeah, really good point.
It's almost like you have to let your intuition, almost you have to down everything and just kind of wing it, busk it, and see has stuck.
Yeah.
And never forget to say to your own client, so what do you think's going on? What do you think you're hearing. And that is incredibly important. We're sometimes translators, you know, for our clients, that they say, oh, I just hate my voice, it's X, Y, Z. And then we kind of help translate it into something that's much more manageable for them. But I agree, you know, yeah, not too much information. I have made mistakes in that area in the past, just like I'm sure you have, Rocky.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's a business tip. If someone walks in and says, I want to work on X, even if you think it needs to be Y and Z, tell them you're working on X.
Mm.
And so
Yeah.
just a business tip.
Thank you so much. So we've got a comment that Frith has left. I couldn't unmute, but I think there is a connection between teaching business people and teaching a singer who is singing for their own reasons and is not a professional or someone wanting to be professional. Student goals may not be the teacher's goals. And I think that's a really
Mm.
point.
Mm.
Okay, well, 4:01. I think it's been a really special hour to have the two authors here. Any final parting words before we say goodbye? Either of you?
Oh, from me? Oh, Christina. So any parting thoughts you have, friend?
Not really, just thank you. It's always a joy to work with Debbie. I think what she has built is extraordinary, and it's lovely to see two of my favorite colleagues side by side of me on this screen, you know, and us, the three of us working together. So thank you.
Absolutely. And I love just the wide range of topics you all have in bring here. I love attending. So thank you.
Mm.
Thank you so much. Well, we'll say goodbye.
Thank you. Should we stay online, Debbie, and let people go and just
And I'll stop recording.
debrief?
Yeah.